Hey, it's Jordan with the Young Turks, TYT Politics. I am here back in East Chicago, Indiana. That would be East Chicago, Indiana, not Chicago. Have to say that as usual. We're about, I'd say, August, a year and 3 months since the first revelations that lead was found in the soil in a government housing complex here in Indiana, 200 times the allowable limit. I always say allowable because there should be no lead in soil and water or any of that stuff. If you don't remember the story, the very short version, Indiana is a very, very industrialized state, a lot of industrialized polluters and a lot of government that looks the other way to those polluters because those polluters pay off the government. So East Chicago, built up predominantly in the 1950s and 60s, had a legacy of lead plants, steel plants, and industry polluters, basically emitting lead through the air, in the soil, and all that. It was predominantly poor Latinos and black people that live in East Chicago, Indiana. So when women like Kamika Anderson next to me, living in this complex called the West Calumet Complex, found out about it, they started wondering, oh, are my health problems, are my kids' health problems because I've been living in this lead-infested shithole for years. So it's now a year later. The EPA was forced to acknowledge they didn't do enough for decades. The state was forced to acknowledge they didn't do enough, the city, and of course, the city blamed the EPA blamed the city. Very few have taken accountability, and of course, poor Latinos and black people have been the ones to suffer. Ty, let me know if the audio is good. I'm here with Kamika Anderson. You're actually, I think, one of the first people I interviewed here in August of last year, so August 2016. We were in the West Calumet complex. This was the government housing complex. You, pretty much 98% African American, poor, were living in. You told me then, they never told you there was a lead plant here, lead issue there. So remind the audience, how long did you live there and what happened to you and your children?
I originally...
Oh, I should say her son. What's your son's name?
This is Logan. Say hi.
Hi, Logan.
Say hi.
So maybe it was black out.
What?
So maybe
So maybe what?
helicopters take over.
The helicopters take over. Yeah, we lived in the complex. I originally moved there in 2005. I had two daughters before I moved in. I moved into what was called the big buildings, the real tall buildings. I stayed downstairs. And I had my oldest son, LJ, while we were staying there.
So the baby's
And he was the one who had majority of the problems from the time he was born. He was had eczema, very asthmatic, allergies, all that, showing signs and symptoms of being allergic to just about everything outside, the trees, dust, mold, peanuts. He was just real hypersensitive. And when I took him to preschool, the normal routine checkups that he had to take, one of them was lead, and his lead levels, I believe at that time, was like 5.4, so they were elevated. And me thinking, you know, when you think of lead, I'm thinking the lead-based paint. So what I did was I just repainted my whole unit on my own, you know, out of my own pocket. I had to take him for repeat testing. His wasn't too high where he had to have drastic measures with the diet and all that, but they just kept monitoring, so I had to take him to get the actual blood stick, the blood draw. And I just never knew that it was because of the dirt he was playing in. We used to go outside, all kids, mud pies, you know, stuff like that. So here I am, letting my son be a kid and not knowing that it's potentially harming him and his developmental, you know, as he grows older. We moved from the 2-bedroom to the 3-bedroom, which is what we did our interview in front of. And we used to I had flowers, like a flower bed that I had put around my unit. So had I had known then, you know, I definitely wouldn't have had them out there playing in dirt and helping me plant flowers and stuff like that. I was just really upset that, you know, that they knew about the lead issue and none of us were never told.
So obviously the government has given you Medicare for All for life to pay for your kids' expenses, to check into your other kids, maybe make sure you have medical coverage because you've been living in an infested lead pool, so to speak. There was also arsenic, high levels of arsenic there. They never really tested for bacteria, who the hell knows, but with lead and arsenic usually comes bacteria too. I'm sure that they have given you medical coverage. They tested your water. I'm sure they paid for your moving expenses, all of that.
No, I moved like right before on my own. I just packed all my stuff up, put it in the storage unit. Me and my husband and the kids, we moved in with a family member until we found, you know, housing, which was like a month later, which wasn't too long, but found the house in Gary. So this was like right before everything kind of hit the fan when they did the big meeting at the 151st Street Center. So no, I was never reimbursed for none of my moving expenses. I was informed that they were giving out money in Section 8 to the women or to whoever lived there who had children under 6. And I went, you know, inquired about it, but kind of got the runaround. So it's not worth the headache, so I just let it go. I never received anything, basically.
You know, it seems to me, because it wasn't like there was lead found in the water, not just in that complex, but in homes in the surrounding areas. So it seems to me like you would do a citywide test. They have not.
No, not that I'm aware of, no. Yeah. I know they tested, you know, was doing different units in different homes, but I don't know, you know, the whole citywide, no, not over the whole East Chicago. No.
And, you know, I wanted to come back because it's kind of like, I don't want to be dramatic, but like you and these people are like the faces of environmental racism. Because like the media, the corporate media like comes in for 5 minutes, oh wow, there's like crazy lead here, and like let's say we care and do something, and then they leave, and then you have to live your lives with a kid with severe autoimmune issues. I've talked to other mothers, learning disabilities, severe mood disorders, mothers, like all on one block. Oh wow, I wonder why all these women like in their 40s, no pre-existing family history of cancers. We all got cancer. We all got severe bronchitis. I'm going to talk to a woman tomorrow, never had an issue before she moved to that complex, 29 years old, has to get a hysterectomy after she moved there. And you guys have not been made whole, none of that.
No, and there's also a high prevalence of miscarriages in this area. You know, me and my husband, we suffered one, you know, right before I got pregnant with Logan, a year prior. And I had never had any issues, you know, pregnancy-wise. But for some reason, we lost that child. So, and I'm kind of thinking, you know, now I think back like, wow, you know, could have been because of where I was living, you know. So.
And we've seen that actually in Flint. There was a study that came out that said they had like record numbers of miscarriages and all that due to the lead issue.
The water.
Yes.
So the water floats.
The water float.
So the water floats.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of our health issues out here in Chicago has definitely can be tied back to our environmental. Me and my son, my oldest son, the one that I was telling you about, we call him LJ, his name is Lamont Jr. We just recently, last week, we went to Washington, D.C. With Moms for Clean Air to kind of talk to a few of the elected officials about Trump's proposing to cut the EPA budget. And as you can see in this area, EPA is not really meeting, you know, the standard here already. And if they cut the budget, I think they're only at like 3% already. And if the budget is cut anymore, it's like you really not giving us a chance to live. Really, like how are we supposed to survive in an environment that's killing us with the air, the lead, water, everything that's surrounding us is designed to destroy us. Like, how do you expect us to survive and thrive in a place like this?
And also, it seems to me, in this complex that you lived, and this was like the focal point of the contamination, it seems to me they're not really thinking like, oh, they want to demolish this as soon as possible, but they're not putting in the proper study, precautions, like, oh, if we demolish this, like, there's a whole lot of lead and arsenic, and they could say they cleaned it up, but you know, a lot of these places, they come in, a little Febreze here and there, and you're done. But you could be putting a whole new level of contamination into the air.
Right, exactly. And not only, you know, and if you put it into the air, then how can you control the area that it is in? Like, air is everywhere. If, you know, the wind come and blow the dirt. We're not, 30 minutes away from Chicago. You know, I'm pretty sure the air and the lead is just blowing all over the borderline. So it's like you're really not containing it. And to come in and to blow up, you know, or tear down a structure that is highly contaminated, you're, I think, proposing more harm than good.
Yeah. Ty, any audio issues? It's loud. Okay. To me, I don't even like saying environmental racism. It's just racism. Yeah. I mean, that's just racism. Black people, Latino people. But you see, I just came from St. Louis. Yeah. You got that level of racism. You got this. Obviously, I mean, I live on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Most it's diverse but wealthier. They had a Legionnaires outbreak. I mean, they handled that so quick. It was like 6 weeks, done. It seems to me that this is kind of like East Chicago, Flint. You have like the controlled demolition of the middle class meets environmental catastrophe. Like looking back on it now, a year later, obviously not a lot has changed, but what should people know what you're dealing with? Because we're seeing water contamination all over the country.
Yeah.
And a lot of cover-ups.
Right. I think for the most part, me, myself personally, we're just dealing with the issues that affected our kids. Like my son, thank God, he's still a pretty smart cookie. He's been a straight A student since he's been in school. My son that I was telling you about, LJ. But he has shown, you know, symptoms of, like sometimes he'll come and tell me like, Ma, I just can't, you know, calm myself down. And I'm like, LJ, you know, sit down. You know, I know most kids are hyper, but sometimes he is like overly, you know, just hard to control sometimes. So I have to kind of get him to focus. But it's just the issues with my kids that I worry more so about them than myself. I'm okay. As long as my kids are okay, I'm all right. So I just think, you know, the mothers that have been displaced and their families, they just need the support of the community, of the elected officials to know that they matter, that we count. We vote just like everybody else or whatever. So I just, to see them acknowledge that we matter, and had this been like you said, in your area, you know, it would have been handled already. And here we are a year later. I don't see much progress on this side of town, you know. So.
And you moved out of East Chicago.
Yeah, I'm actually in Gary now, you know, but East Chicago has been home to me since I was 3. So it's like I didn't want to uproot my children, so they still go to school out here. I didn't want, because everything was changing real fast at one time, you know, all of a sudden. So I didn't want to just not have them in the same school environment where they felt comfortable. So we travel back out here. My mom still lives in Zone 2, so yeah.
Thanks for talking to us. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.